Hello and welcome to Clickbait, and today we're talking about the camera of the moment, the must-have, the camera that's captured the zeitgeist of the day. We're talking about the Yashica T4 because at any given moment there is a must-have item, a camera which marks you out as a photographer of discerning taste and distinction and extreme buying power in this particular case, because this little 1990s point and shoot has become the absolute must-have camera to own at the moment. And I'm very lucky to have borrowed one, so thanks Andy for the loan of the camera, because personally I would find it a little galling to spend 500 quid on a little plastic point and shoot. However, a lot of people are, and it does seem to be the camera to have right now. Why, you ask, is this little 1990s point and shoot 500 quid? Good question. Because it certainly isn't the cutting edge industrial design that's gone on here. It is a very standard looking 1990s point and shoot camera. It's grey plastic, a little bit of rubber for grip, the clean swooping curves which are the hallmark of 1990s design. The reason people go crazy in the coconuts for this thing is that lens, the little Carl Zeiss T-Star Tessar 35mm, because that's considered one of the best bits of glass ever shoved into a small plastic pocket camera. However, is it really worth that much money? So I took this and a roll of Kodak Gold out for a week and had a little play around, and this is what I thought of the things. Well, let's take a look at the camera itself and see what you get for your money. Well, first of all, lots of grey plastic. It's a satiny, very tinily textured plastic. Up at the front we've got the lens itself. You've got an infrared window for the 3-point autofocus. We've got our viewfinder, we've got a flash, and that's an important point, 3 points of autofocus in there. Up on top we've only got 4 more controls, the power slider switch of course, the shutter button, and the self timer and the flash. It does have various flash modes. In standard mode it gives you that terrifying whiteout vampires on holiday type look, but you do have a couple of other modes. As well as automatic, you have daytime fill flash, nighttime turn the flash off, and I've got to say the self timer button is surprisingly hard to push with a thumbnail. On the back of the camera we've got a little door for your CR123 battery. You pop the back of the camera open, you've got room for your film, and it's DX up to 3200 ISO. There it is thinking it's loading a film. And underneath the camera, and this is by no means guaranteed in this class of camera, we've got a tripod mount and we've got a rewind button, so the camera won't actually wind the film back automatically when it gets to the end. You have to push the button, or you can mid-roll rewind if you want to change films, which is also quite nice. When it comes to shooting, it takes that long for the camera to be up and ready, and when you want to take a photo of something, it will find your subject and focus on it in about half a second. This is one of the reasons why it's a darling of the street photographer, because it's small and it's discreet, it doesn't look like anything, and you can have it up and shooting in a fraction of a second, which is all very good. In terms of focus, and I'll come to this in a second, you do have only one level of manual control, because this isn't a full replacement for a rangefinder. You're not going to swap out your Leica for one of these, because you don't have any manual control over the aperture or the shutter. The camera does everything itself. The only control you do have is autofocus and auto exposure lock. If you very lightly push and hold the button, it will focus and auto exposure lock on whatever you're pointing at, and it'll hold that focus, and then you can move it in the old school way of finding your focus somewhere else in the frame. That does give you an element of control which not every compact pocket camera of the 90s would have done, but it does give you that one little element. Because the focusing area of the frame is very much in the centre, and if you want to shoot off centre, you're going to have to do that lock, turn and push. It weighs 190 grams, and this slippery shape will find its way into most coat pockets without too much trouble. You will struggle to get this in your jeans though, especially if you're wearing skinny hipster jeans, as someone who's got 500 quid to spend on one of these cameras probably will be. Not that I'm judging. I'm judging a bit. But the real reason people go crazy for this is of course this lens. 35mm, an absolute favourite with street photographers and all kinds of other general photography. It's a really versatile focal length, f3.5, but it's not its cutting edge industrial design, which is of course no worse or better than some of the other rivals, things like the Olympus AF10 from a similar kind of era. Perhaps better though than the Pentax Zoom, which was on the chunky side. So it is nicely compact, an easy thing to carry around. It's discreet. That f3.5, it puts it on a par with things like, well, a camera, which is one of my favourites, the Olympus XA2. But of course there are other cameras out there which will go to f2.8. So let's look at what it's like actually in use. I took it out for a week and strolled around the place looking at as many things as I possibly could. in as many situations as I could. Knowing it's got a shutter range from 1 second to 1/700th of a second, I thought I'd push it in a few different circumstances. So I took it up to London, trying to shoot some Christmas lights. And you know what, it's actually done a pretty impressive job, because this is a hard scene to expose for, because we've got the bright lights across the street hanging up there in the sky. But then also we've got people down here which are virtually silhouettes, and in between we've got the buildings which are illuminated by the cars. The buses are actually really quite nicely exposed. It found the lights to focus on, and that could have been a difficult thing for a camera like this to work out what to do with. And it found an exposure point mostly for the hanging Christmas lights, but with enough ambient light around it to cope with that. I was actually rather impressed with that. This is handheld, obviously with no readout. I can't tell you exactly what shutter speed it went to. That shutter speed range is actually stepless. It's a bit like a CVT gearbox in a car. From a whole second to a 7/100th of a second, it will find its point wherever it exactly needs it. So it'll always fine tune the exposure as precisely as it can, which is quite impressive. I did have a go at some street photography, trying to find some interesting passers-by to go and grab shots of. However, it was blooming freezing that day, and everyone had gone into, well, Rose's coffee and juice shop by the look of it. However, I did notice these two pairs of women just chatting in the window, one side on, one front and back on. And they were framed really nicely. And even though it was New Year, the black and white building was made to really stand out by this colourful Christmas time stuff which was still on up in the New Year. And I just happened to walk past, grab the camera, frame it and snap the shot. And the camera did actually, well, a good job of finding what to focus on. And I was actually pretty pleased with it. Again, this is a bit of a success story for the Yashica T4. It did a good job there. This was a really hard one for it to try and grab anything out of, because we've got people in all different places, really heavily backlit and not a lot of front lighting going on. But I wanted to try and get this couple in the middle who are shooting a selfie in front of these interesting lights in Covent Garden. And again, it was a difficult situation. I really was throwing the absolute worst that I could find at this poor little camera. And again, it's done a pretty good job. They probably got a better photo off their iPhone than I got with the film, but it worked out really quite well. It found them and focused on them despite being backlit heavily, and it exposed on them as well. So we've got a bit of an overexposure in the lights themselves and a heavy underexposure on the people in front. But this worked out surprisingly well. I could crop this quite a lot. But as impromptu street photography goes, that's not bad. Don't forget, 35mm lens, your feet are the zoom. If you're capturing something you've just seen in the moment, you just take the photo. Now, I don't know who this guy in the foreground was. I wasn't actually planning to shoot this shot, but it does give a perfect example of what the flash looks like if you do take a flash photo in the dark. It is that zapped out, washed out feel. You want to be turning it off as much as you possibly can. Now, this one I posted on Instagram the other day because this was a really nice shot. It's an image I've seen a million times, because this picture of Aylesford in Kent is so heavily over photographed. It's a perfect chocolate box image, really. You've got the medieval bridge, you've got the medieval church, you've got the nice row of houses, and every now and then you get a day when everything is so still, the river is mirror smooth, it's perfect. And I was driving over and had the camera in the pocket of the car, and this is the thing that makes it so handy, because unlike an SLR or a mirrorless even, you can have it in your coat pocket, in your car pocket. It can just be there ready to shoot at any given time, and that's what it was. So I jumped out, got the perfect blue sky, got the perfect mirror image of getting everything perfectly exposed, perfectly in focus. Honestly, I couldn't have done that better. I couldn't have done that better with an SLR camera, to be perfectly honest. And in this case, when everything is aligning perfectly, the stars are aligning for us, it does give, from this little lens, an amazing image. This was actually rather impressive. Even a bit of impromptu action. I was driving past a demolition site and I managed to catch this building being torn down, which it still managed to jump in, grab a bit of colour, grab a bit of shape, everything exposed well, everything in focus. This is really quite an impressive little job. Running through some of the other pictures I took when I was out and about, this one I was trying to work out what it would do with a situation like this. Could I get a shot through the glass, or would it find something else to focus on? In this case, the minimum focus of the camera is 35cm, which is very close indeed. But it seems to have been confused by the reflections. Focused over here on the window frame, we've actually got a lot of depth of field going on, so the lady over here is actually in focus. So it's not always a guaranteed winner, because you can't see what the camera is focusing on. This was quite fun. This little dog, I think it's a guide dog, staring back at the camera while everyone's chatting in the window. I like this. I like this image. Again, it's got the speed to grab an image when you want it, and it will generally nail the focus if things are not too difficult. Trying to shoot through glass again, this time it did get it right. I think it found the dress, it wasn't too confused by the reflections, and it looked quite sharp. That 35cm close focus, it does let you get in there and find something interesting nearby that you can actually focus really tightly in on. So it does work. It does look a little muzzy. Where these leaves are too close to the camera, you can see them just drifting out of focus. This one though, it seems to have struggled a little bit. The focus point's about here, just behind the plant for some reason. I'm not sure what it's chosen to focus on. I think it's actually chosen these stems at the back rather than the flower in the front. I'm not sure why it's chosen to do that. So it's not 100% guaranteed with a slightly tricky subject in front of the lens. I don't know the dog's name. It was just sat next to us in a cafe and it just stared at our pies the whole time. It's a lovely dog and it focused quite well. What I am noticing though is the colour rendition from this is nice, but it's a little bit washed out. I don't know how much of this is the Kodachrome gold and how much is the washed out light of the days. This is though another example of the flash at work. This is when I left the flash on and shot this big wall of flowers on the side of the street, and it was horribly washed out. It really is bam and the colour's gone. Turn the flash off, much nicer. So my advice, although it has a flash, turn it off as much as possible. One thing to remember this camera, whatever you set things on the flash and so forth up to, it will reset back to standard default when you turn it off and on again. In conclusion, what do I think of the Yashica T4? Well, on its positive side, it's very fast to react. It finds a subject and it focuses and releases lightning quick. It's a great street photography camera in that respect. The lens is very sharp indeed. If you get things right, it's a really lovely crisp lens. You can see here, it's got this big red boat, really nicely sharp. However, do I think it's worth £500? Because I had a quick check online before I started recording. When I was given this camera, they were going for about £350. In the last month or so, they seem to have risen to around £450 to £500. Even the scrap versions of these cameras are £100. It's just absolutely ridiculous how much money this camera is worth. Honestly, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think I was getting significantly better results than I would do with the XA2, to be perfectly honest. I think a lot of it is just purely down to having to have the camera of the moment, because lots of 1990s cameras will work virtually as well as this, and there were other great lenses around at the time. Yes, it is a good camera. Yes, it's a great lens. No, it's not worth £500. That is my conclusion, having used it for a little while. If you're thinking of buying one of these things and you've got £500 spare, then by all means do it. However, I do expect the bubble will burst. Give it 6 months. I think it's going to be worth an awful lot less money because there are other great cameras out there. And it's a good camera, but it's not a £500 camera. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting, informative, and maybe like some of the photos. If you have, please hit like and subscribe and join us again next time when who knows what I'll be playing with. He says, looking around at a Olympus AF10. At the end, you have to push the button, or you can mid-roll rewind. Or you can